What was the best you have no power here moment you have ever seen? I used to work for a super cunty manager when I worked at McDonald's. This guy was horrible to us. He was constantly bullying us, crap talking us to customers, and doing everything in his power to make us miserable. Well, so many people complained about him that he ended up getting fired. New manager was great. He was super chill and understanding with us all. A couple weeks after he took over, the old douchebag comes in and starts talking about how terrible the store looks, how our service is shittier than ever, and how much this store needs him. The new manager looked at him and said, if you don't leave, then the cops are gonna make you. When the douchebag didn't move, new awesome manager stuck to his guns and called the cops. The douchebag is no longer allowed on any McDonald's property in the city and has a restraining order against him. You know he's a douchebag because he came back to where he got fired from. The first time I had dinner at my parents' house after I got my own apartment, my dad was giving me grief as usual. Finally, I stood up and said, I don't live here anymore. I don't have to put up with you this way any longer. I'm going home. And walked out. Most liberating moment of my life. A while back, I got a job as a popcorn monkey in the local cinema, as a temporary thing while I figured out what the frick I was doing with my life. There was a supervisor that had worked there since the site opened, around 5 years, who was a total B and had had numerous complaints about her from countless staff. In the first week, I nearly quit because of her attitude. As an example, one night I was on a close and basically cleaned the entirety of the front of house on my own. I stopped to take a drink of water and she marched up to me going, we don't pay you to stand around drinking, you know, to which I calmly responded that I was thirsty and needed a drink of water, and if she wanted to tell me I wasn't allowed to have a glass of water then good luck. But I'm pretty sure health and safety would have something to say about that. She huffed about not having had a break all day, which I ignored cause not my freaking problem. But internally I was put out about it, because it was totally freaking pointless to be such a T about things. About 2 weeks in I get promoted to supervisor as I was clearly extremely competent by their usual standards. I could walk and fart at the same time, but she also gets promoted to floor manager. So she continues to work her little power trips and try and lord it over me and everyone else. 4 weeks after that, I get another promotion to floor manager, and at this point we're equals, so she can't boss me around anymore. So instead, she tries a different tack, which is to try and lord it over me with her superior knowledge of processes, where to find stuff, etc. My response is to go, saccharine sweet, oh thanks, that's so helpful. I mean, you know how things work so much better than me, because you've been here 5 years, and I've only been here 6 weeks. She had a face like a smacked ass. It was delightful. I get promoted to supervisor as I was clearly extremely competent by their usual standards. I could walk and fart at the same time. I try not to think of myself as incompetent, but damned if I can't walk and fart at the same time. I have to stop to toot. I told my ex I was getting remarried. He told me he was going to stop me and put a line on my house, which I bought with my money 6 years after the divorce. My son would come home from visitations telling me how his dad was going to stop the wedding and I'd have to pay him all of this money. Ladida. Get to court. His attorney goes blah 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 for what felt like forever. My lawyer, yes, I had to freaking get one, stands up and simply hands the judge the divorce papers showing the disbursement of funds and how my ex isn't owed anything. Judge looks at ex's lawyer and basically asks, did you even ask for this document before filing, and dismisses the case. Ex and I were moving out after a breakup, cleaning out garage. She was being critical of my post-breakup plan of moving in with a co-worker until I could find a better place to live, as most options weren't great. I took a deep breath and laughed. This puzzled her. Why are you laughing? She asked. I collected myself and said, because this is the last time I have to listen to this. You don't get to be critical of anything I ever do, ever again. It was a really great feeling, because I literally thought of the you have no power here as I laughed. I'm a high school teacher who teaches a lot of senior grades and so has to deal with graduation grades, references for university, all that jazz. I had a parent of a graduating kid in my classroom in June, after final marks were given to students but not formally reported, who was a dental surgeon in town, ran a large operation, Donated a lot to local sports. Big man in a small town. I had given his kid a mark in the high B range, and so he marched into my office and started off with the "there must be some mistake" line, which moved swiftly into the "you're going to change it because I tell you to how much will it cost to get him the A." When I refused the bribe, he went to "you're fired!" ! Not "I'm going to get you fired" but "you're fired. Clean out your desk." I just asked him to leave. Ended badly. He threatened violence. I reported him to the school admin. He's now banned from the property. "Mister, I pay your salary so you work for me, you lousy piece of s." It was threatened with the cops by Mr. Random Act PG. I was waiting for a friend to finish work. She worked at a restaurant so fancy they had someone vetting guests at a podium outside. The place was glitzy and the folks were glam, so the great and good would descend in droves. Those with a reservation were sent in. Prospective walk-ins had to queue. A car sweeps up. The driver jumps out and holds the door open to unleash a hat and dress. The woman accompanying said finery, a C-list actress from a regional daytime TV show, looked through everyone present and moved to enter. She froze, appalled, when the guest vetter intercepted, asking, "Do you have a reservation?" She mustn't have heard the question because she didn't respond. Instead, she drew herself up to the full height of her couture and demanded, "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," said the maitre d'. Back of the queue. Oof. LOL. I did the same when I was bouncing. I was out policing the queue when a group came over to me and asked if I could get them in for free ahead of the queue. Apparently one of them was some big shot soccer player, but I don't like sport and didn't care, so told the lot of them to queue like everyone else. This is a bit silly, but gave me a great feeling of satisfaction. Due to the bad economy and poor money management, my parents have moved into the spare room of the house my husband and I bought a year ago. Things are mostly smooth, though I'm not the closest to them for several reasons I won't go into here. The other evening I was out gardening. Because it's hot during the day and we have the luck of having a streetlight right next to our front yard, keeping it pretty well illuminated even after sundown. I mostly garden at night, and I thought I had gotten the hose twisted, as it kept getting stuck. This went on for a bit. When I realized that it wasn't stuck, but being pulled, I looked into the dim area just past the illumination of the streetlight and spied my father, crouched over and tugging the hose. Well, I did the only reasonable thing to do, and I sprayed him. He yelled and ran inside with me chasing. Once he got inside, he made a face and goes, "You can't get me now. I'm inside," in that father to daughter "don't you make a mess" tone of voice. I readied my hose, looked him in the eye and said, "It's my house," and just freaking let loose with the hose. He was soaked. Worth cleaning up the mess for that moment of true fear in his eyes. This is the most wholesome crap I've ever heard in my life. This was great. Not me, but a story my dad used to tell me all the time. So my biological grandmother was very emotionally abusive. She was very controlling and tried to keep people within her sphere of influence. There's a reason why my grandfather divorced her. In high school my dad had a job washing airplanes at an airport in our area, which he absolutely loved. He is a huge fan of aircraft in general. He had classes until roughly 10 AM and then he'd be off to work until around 10 PM. It was what he loved. He didn't mind long hours being around aircraft all day. But one day he came home a little too late for his mom's liking. She said she'd take his keys to his motorcycle and that he lost privileges to it. The fact of the matter is that he bought the motorcycle himself and he needed it to get to school as well as work. He laughed in her face and she didn't do anything. She couldn't do anything. TLDR. A pair of angry moms threatened legal action if I fired their useless kids. I work for a trampoline park franchise. We opened a sister location that I ran for about a year and a half before moving back to take over the old location. When I got back, a lot needed fixing, but in particular there were 2 teenage employees that had been fired, suspended on numerous occasions. They were generally lazy, rude jackasses that shouldn't have been hired in the first place. Problem was, they both had aggressive helicopter moms that intimidated the manager into rescinding any punishments. Once I came back, I took stock of our employees and had a long talk with the entire leadership team. I learned which employees caused which problems, who was unreliable, who had a regular habit of skipping shifts, texting on shift, etc. I fired about a half dozen that first week, including those 2 I mentioned. That night, Both moms called my personal cell to scream at me. Our numbers are listed in the online scheduling tool so employees can find shift covers more easily. They demanded to know why I fired them, threatened to sue, have me arrested, accused me of discrimination against their white middle class sons, etc. I simply asked, is your son over 18? Yes. So you're demanding I illegally release personal information regarding a former adult employee? Bye. Woman complained we wouldn't fill her clearly fraudulent C2 prescription. Brought the brand new store manager back to the pharmacy to make us fill it. She says you have to fill it. God himself cannot make us fill anything if it fails the checks. Number. The guy that I'd gone on a few dates with introduced me to his parents. Things went well, or so I thought. He drives me home. We end up talking and drinking a few beers. I didn't want him on the road with any alcohol in his system, and I enjoyed his company. So we end up hanging out until 3 AM. His mom starts blowing up his phone, demanding that he comes home. So he drives himself home to find that he's been locked out of his house. His mom said that he can sleep outside. He shouldn't be spending time with someone like me. Still don't know what she meant by that, and that I'm just another stop on the P train. He tells her not to talk about me like that, to which she says when you're under my roof, I'll say whatever I want about whoever I want. So he picks up his phone, calls me, asks if he can stay at my place for a little while. It's been 7 years, we are engaged, have a dog, a cat, and a happy life. I also plan on throwing some subtle train themes into the wedding celebration after the end of the plague. In your vows say something like I'm glad I'm the last stop on the P train for you. I worked in management at a theater for a while. If the concession counter was slammed and I was able, I'd leave my post and help them sling popcorn. One night while helping out, a particularly belligerent man started cussing out a 16-year-old girl on a cash register for being too slow, even suggesting she quit since she clearly couldn't handle pushing buttons or scooping popcorn. It was pretty disgusting and I felt so bad for the girl. I stepped in and told the guy that our employees have the right to refuse service to customers who harass them as part of our anti-harassment discrimination policy, empathized that the lines were longer than usual, and suggested he should apologize and move on. He was left half his order on the counter and started fuming off, anticipating his next move. I went back to my original post that night, as manager of the customer service kiosk. Oh boy, the look on his face when he saw me. Didn't want a refund of his tickets though, so I assume he watched the movie without popcorn. Good on you. I hate those abusive fricks, always finding some young, sweet person to abuse. IT services for a client of mine. They paid for me to come to their office and address a problem. 8 hours minimum time. The issue was resolved in about 45 minutes. They'd set up something incorrectly and it was pretty obvious once I got into the system. I was packing up to leave and the client stopped me. What are you doing? The system is fixed, so I'm headed out back to my office. No, I paid for 8 hours. You'll do your 8 hours. If I tell you to wash my car for 8 hours, that's what you'll be doing, right? So anyway, I'm leaving. I'll notify the office to send you the invoice and in all likelihood we'll no longer be working with you and withdrawing your lease on our equipment. A client once paid for me to fly to New York and spend 2 nights in a nice Manhattan hotel to add a semicolon to her config file. Had a client at an animal hospital get upset when the veterinarian was a female. This lady legitimately threw a fit and refused to let the arguably much more qualified doctor see her pet for no other reason than that the vet was female. So, the doctor told her to get out. The lady wouldn't leave and started yelling at and berating the doctor, threatening to call the owner of the clinic. She even whipped out her phone and acted like she was going to dial. Now someone saying they know the owner is something that is very, very common, as the owner is still a practicing vet well over 60 hours a week, and has been for 20 plus years. Probably thousands of people have this guy's number, most of them on the older side that try to flex it, though. So our female vet said go right ahead, I'm calling the cops if you don't leave, and that's exactly what happened. The client quickly left once the vet started speaking with the dispatcher. The police still came and took a report. Later, when the owner caught wind, he left a note on her account that she was no longer welcome in our clinic. Some secretary of some branch of a state agency would go on a power trip and stamp Do not copy on things that she sent to local agencies. Well, I work for an oversight agency and I needed a copy. Locals were terrified, so I rolled my eyes and called to explain that the locals and I were basically the same entity. Woman started to have a conniption fit, but she got real quiet when I cut her off and said, "Fine, I'll issue a subpoena. What's your name and job title?" she answered, and the sheriff served her a subpoena for what I wanted. Guess she wasn't used to that. I worked for 8 years servicing communications equipment on site. 5 of those years were as the department manager. When oil was found in our area, we got so busy we could barely even think. Most of my team were pulling 12+ hour days 6 days a week and we were struggling to hire people quick enough. One day, the CEO texted and said he hired an assistant manager for me, which was something I desperately needed. I was dirty as heck from my previous job and swung by the store to pick him up and take him to one of our sites where he would be doing paperwork. The moment he got in the truck, he immediately started talking crap. He started telling me about how everything we were doing is fricked up and the department manager, my name, was a total moron and he would have my job within a few months. I just sat and mostly listened. He obviously didn't know crap about my industry and every time he would say something wrong, I would try to politely correct him and he'd either backtrack or insist that I was trained wrong. When we got to the site out in the middle of the West Texas desert, he complained about the layer of dust on everything and ordered me to clean up the entire site. When I sat down at my desk, the guy continued to be my ear off about everything that was wrong and chastised me for sitting down at my desk when he told me to clean up the site. So I called for a taxi, filled out a notice of termination, and handed it to him. He looked absolutely shocked. Then he defiantly protested that only CEO could fire him. I said, "And my name, right?" He sheepishly nodded. So I stuck my hand out for a handshake and introduced myself. I can teach anyone how to service equipment, but I don't have a clue how to teach someone to not be an butthole. That would be a customer we had named Nick. I'll leave his last name out to protect the stupid. He would email us and always CC editor at sumnationarnosparpa.com and most of his emails were things like "nothing fricking works." None of the national newspapers responded. I imagine some underling just rolled his eyes and deleted them. Finally he said, "Fix this in 5 minutes or I cancel." My manager says, "Let me see that email." He responded, "Thank you. I cancelled your account. We don't want customers like you anyway. If you want to contact the media, that's your call. I'll happily provide the months of threatening emails you sent to my staff." He gave us months of headaches over a £45 quarter account. We definitely didn't need him. Having worked for a national paper answering reader issues, he is not alone in ceasing in media outlets to every complaint. He is in a depressingly large club. I wasn't good at returning library books when I was a kid. I got lectured by my school librarian about it a lot. Fast forward 20 years and I'm a supervisor at the local public library and my former now retired school librarian goes there. One day I see her sneaking around the front desk instead of coming back to say hi to me and I immediately figure something's up. I go up to say hi and she acts exasperated and tells me she was trying to avoid me because she had overdue books. So I put on my reading glasses, pulled them down over my nose, and delivered the same lecture she'd given me countless times about being responsible and turning in books on time. Your training is now complete. I started working for a welding company as an engineering manager. We were selling an extremely complex weldment pressure tank that goes under the shitter for 4.9k. Out costs were 9.3k. The owner took the bid to get in with this big company. The owner legit said, "We'll make it up in volume." We weren't. Anyway, the buyer for the larger company was a huge B and would regularly yell on phone calls. We sent them a letter that we would honor the last 5 tanks on the current PO at the same price. I didn't even want to do that. But after that they were going up to 10k per. She drove down with her boss the next day and demanded an explanation and threatened to pull the business. I replied that we were losing 5k per tank and couldn't do it anymore. She demanded evidence, which I already had pulled up, and simply turned on the projector. I said, "As you can see, we cannot continue to make this part at such a huge loss and I don't think anyone can make it for the original price. So if you have to pull the business, we understand." Her boss tripped over himself cutting her off and said they weren't pulling out and actually thanked us for honoring the current PO. I didn't have many run-ins with her after that. Know your costs and never be afraid to fire a customer. I have many times. Most all come back. Let them save face and very often they become actual good customers. I joined the Army Reserve in 1983, in between my junior and senior year in high school. Going to drill one weekend and we were doing war games with another reserve unit. They mailed everyone a letter with the challenge and response to be let into the unit. As a lowly private, I was standing guard at the entrance and had to say the challenge. Everything's going good until a city police car pulls up and the cop is a new lieutenant. I give the challenge and he just look at me. I say it again and he said to just let him in because he didn't know it. He starts getting belligerent and I ask him to turn off the car and step out. He gets out and starts yelling at me. The sergeant major heard the commotion and comes over and tears the young lieutenant a new butthole. It was very satisfying to watch and I learned that day that even though a second lieutenant outranks a sergeant major, it really doesn't matter because the sergeant major had been in for 20 years and didn't put up with any bulls. The best description of how a sergeant major chain of command works. From another sub. There's two kinds of authority in the military, rank and position. In regards to rank, an LT outranks a SGM. However, in regards to position, a SGM is likely at least 2 or 3 echelons above the LT, and can easily make that LT's life a crap waiting simulator. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.